Hey, and welcome to Mrs. Bunn's Flip Classroom. What you will need is your spiral notebook and, of course, a writing utensil. Alrighty, let's see. Here we go. All right, so in your spiral notebook, what I need for you to do is write down analyzing complex characters. This is what we're going to be focusing on for this particular lesson. Here is the learning target. I want you to pause and take a minute to go ahead and read this, and then you're going to answer QTNA, which basically means questions that need answering. Alrighty. And then when you come back to class, this is going to be one of the first things that we discuss, your learning target, and did you answer these questions? All right, so thank you for pausing and writing down your learning target. What I want you to do is also go back into the learning target that you wrote down, and I want you to highlight, shade, color, circle these phrases that have been that are colored and they are bold in color because they are very, very, very important to mastering this particular standard. I can analyze, and we know that when we're talking about analyzing, we're talking about breaking something down to see how all the components work together. So we're going to analyze how complex characters develop over the course of a text, interact with other characters, advance the plot, and or develop a theme. So we're basically going to be looking at the complex character and to see how they help us with this story, how they help move this story along. Speaking of stories, I want to go ahead and tell you a quick story, okay? I just want you all just to listen, and if you have any questions or anything that comes to your mind, please jot it down on a sticky note and feel free to save it for me when we meet at our next class session. Once upon a time, there lived a family of roaches. They lived in a cold, that needs to be cold, a cold, and I'm going to change that. They lived in a cold, dark, and dreary cave without any lights. There, in the darkness of the cave, is where they remained until they all died. It's a pretty good story, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, I'll give myself a 10, right? Wrong. Was something missing? The plot development was lagging a bit. And when we're talking about plot, what I'm saying is without the plot, the events that occur in the story, it's difficult to determine who the protagonist is. It's difficult to determine what is the story about because there isn't much happening in the story. There aren't any events that help us to identify the protagonist, the antagonist. There aren't any events that help us to understand or identify any conflicts. There was nothing really there in this story that helped us to understand the character's motivation. What we know about literature, literary fiction is all about human life. These stories help us to learn about what it really means to be human. How should we interact with each other? What is our relationship with each other and how the world works? So we look at the relationship between the characters and the events in the stories. We look at their lives, and their lives allow us to have a deeper understanding and insight into the author's message about life. I know you guys are like, what, Miss Bond? You said a lot. You could always stop and rewind and listen again. All right. So let's just review quickly. I want you all to stop and pause and you're going to write this down. This is activating prior knowledge. You all should be privy to these particular characters. So again, just stop right here, write them down, and then pick up when you finish. All right. So thank you. So let's quickly recap the various types of characters. Now, each character plays a particular role in shaping the story. However, there are a few characters that will stand out. There are a few characters that we really, really will focus on the most. Can you guess what they are? Correct. The protagonist, which is the main character of the story, the antagonist, which is not the bad guy. The antagonist is not necessarily the villain. What he is or she is they are the opposite of the protagonist. They oppose the protagonist. For example, if we were watching a movie and the protagonist of this movie was I don't know, give me a villain, the Joker, right? He's the main character. He is who this story is about. But then in the story of the Joker, we have the Batman. Batman there. Is Batman the good guy in this particular story? Uh, sure, he can be seen as a good guy, but he's not the protagonist. He is someone there that is antagonizing or going against the Joker, right? Because this whole story is about the Joker. All right. So I want you all to continue writing down these your characters. Here's your next slide of characters. And here again, we're going to focus on just a few. I want you all to pay very close attention to when we're talking about a round character. And then on the previous slide, I want you all to pay attention to, oops, excuse me, the dynamic character. A round character plus a dynamic character, in my definition, is someone who's complicated because this round character is complex. With the dynamic character, they go through a lot of changes, right? And that's what we're looking for when we're talking about a complex character. All right, so here's a quick little game. I want you to match the character to the type. So our protagonist in Lion King would be who? Right, Simba. Our antagonist, Scar. Our round character, of course, is Simba, and this is grown Simba. Our static character, someone who does not change, remain the same, of course, Scar. Dynamic character, you're right, Simba. Flat character, mm-hmm. All right, and then our foil. All right, so when we're talking about foil, you know what that means. So our foils here are Scar and Simba. All right, so here are our next group of keywords and phrases. Remember, at the very beginning, I talked to you all about your learning target and the phrases that you will see accordingly. So, our keywords and phrases, these are words and phrases that you will see again, okay? All right, so when we're talking about action and events, of course, we're talking about the plot. When we're talking about advancing the plot, we're talking about those movements that help us get to the theme or the resolution of the text. Complex characters. We know these are characters who are just like us. These are characters um, that have issues. And then when we're talking about development, we're simply talking about how the story unfolds, how the story is built. When we're talking about interact, we're talking about the effects that the characters have on one another, how they come into each other's space. And when we're talking about develop the thing, we're talking about details from the text that will provide that are provided by the author that helps to tell the theme. And of course, motivation, we're talking about the reason behind the action. So remember, pause, go back, and you can write these down at your leisure and at your speed. Okay. All right. So conflicts and interactions. Again, you know this is a very note heavy. Note heavy. All right. So we previously discussed various characters, correct? And we talked about the protagonist and the antagonist, and we said that they are very, very, very important to our text. And we know that the plot shapes characters and characters shapes the plot. Please write that phrase down, that the plot shapes characters and characters shapes the plot. Now what we're going to do is we're going to discuss basically the two components of these, how these two components rely heavily on each other. So we're talking about motivation. Again, we're talking about what drives the characters. Why do the character behave in the manner that they behave? Why do they think the way that they think? Why do they act the way that they act? That is motivation. So when we think about Scar, why did he do the things that he do? Interaction, again, is how they communicate. It's their direct involvement with each other. It's very, very similar to the real world. When we think about um, things that happen in our life, right? For example, let's take Scar. Scar was upset at how Mufasa ran um, the Pride Lands. His interaction with him, as we will see, is one that, you know, is fake at times, is one that's angry at times, and how he interacts with Mufasa helped to create his conflicts. He had uh, opposing views from Mufasa. And some of those things were internal, okay? Now, as a result of this interaction, as a result of Scar's motivation, based on his interactions with Mufasa, we see that we have an external conflict. We see that Scar had plotted to kill Mufasa. Well, guess what? Let's talk about internal response. And then in the next video, we're going to talk about external response. So, internal response is simply how we react or a character react inwardly. It's demonstrated through their thoughts and their feelings. Okay, so do we know what Simba is thinking right here? We do not. Do we know what Scar Mufasa is thinking right here? We do not. So we know that something happened, an event happened that caused them to respond internally. It's also about how the characters and um, their thoughts about these events occur in the story. Um, when we're talking about these things, we're describing the character's innermost thoughts, the deep thoughts, the feelings. And this helps us as readers to understand why the character do what they do, why they say what they say. All right, so external conflict. External, we know that external is outward, right? So when we're talking about the external conflicts, we're talking about an outward response to something that happened in the text, an outward response to an inward. It's an outward response to an inward response or internal response. In other words, if I feel guilty about something, that is an internal response, right? I feel guilty and I go out and I try to make it right by, I don't know, doing a grand gesture. That is an external response. Okay? So it helps to create events in the story. It helps to it helps us as readers to see how the characters act, right? Now, the way that we find it out, we do the what and the why chart. What happened? Why did it happen? Okay. What happened? Why did it happen? And we will talk more about this in class. Here's something that I want you all to think about is the connections. We're looking at the character's motivation and we're looking at the possible resulting conflict. Something I want you all to remember is the power of connection. All of these things work together. Their interactions, the events, the conflicts, the motivation, all of these things work together because the plot shapes the character shapes the plot, and all these things help us to determine a possible theme. What's a possible theme in Lion King? Here's what I said. Learn from past mistakes, grow personally from it, and then move on with your life and do not dwell on the things that you cannot change. All righty. We don't need to